For 20 years, my world arrived in a crisp, business-sized envelope once a month. It was never just a check. It was a judgment. Inside, tucked behind the perforated edges of the alimony payment from my ex-husband, Lawrence, there was always a note. A small, folded piece of paper from his personal stationery, the kind with his initials embossed in an obnoxious gold font at the top. The notes were always short, and always dripping with a condescending pity that felt more like a weapon than a kindness. Hope this helps you get by, Lisa. Don't spend it all in one place. Just a little something to keep you on your feet. He thought he was my lifeline. For 2 decades, Lawrence Grant pictured me as a woman adrift, clutching the life raft he so magnanimously tossed me each month. He imagined me eagerly tearing open the envelope, my hands trembling with relief, my future utterly dependent on his signature at the bottom of a check. He told our friends, our family, and most importantly, our son Dylan, that he was taking care of me, that he was doing the honorable thing. In his mind, he was the hero of my story, the benevolent benefactor who allowed me to survive after our marriage crumbled. He was wrong. He didn't know that my real life, the one I built with my own 2 hands, had nothing to do with him. He didn't know that I never cashed a single one of those checks. Not one. For 240 months, I took his smug little offerings, his paper-thin insults, and I locked them away. Each check, with its smarmy accompanying note, went directly from my mailbox into a heavy, cold safety deposit box at a quiet downtown bank. They were a monument, not to his generosity, but to my resolve. An untouched, 20-year archive of his arrogance. I built a business from the ground up, a boutique firm specializing in large-scale botanical architecture for corporate spaces. I turned sterile lobbies into living rainforests and cold atriums into serene gardens. I won awards. I was featured in magazines. I bought a sprawling loft in a converted textile mill with 16-foot windows that let the morning sun spill across the original hardwood floors. I made a life for myself that was more vibrant, more successful, and more profoundly my own than anything Lawrence, with all his calculated financial projections, could have ever imagined for me. And all the while, he kept sending his little envelopes, completely oblivious, convinced he was funding my pathetic small existence. His lifeline, he called it. But a line can be used for more than just rescue. It can be used to anchor something. It can be used to set a trap. Or, if you give someone enough of it, they can use it to hang themselves. The past finally came calling on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't Lawrence's voice on the other end of the line, which was a surprise. It was our son, Dylan. He was 26, a product of a split home, and for most of his life, he had been a victim of his father's carefully curated narrative. He sounded panicked, his words tumbling over one another in a frantic rush. "Mom? Mom, you have to help. It's Dad." My stomach tightened. I was standing in the middle of my studio, a blueprint for a new hotel lobby spread out on the massive oak table in front of me. The air smelled of damp earth and moss. It was my sanctuary, and his call felt like a violation. "Dylan, slow down. What's wrong with your father?" "It's the IRS, Mom. They're auditing him, like a full-blown go-through-everything audit, going back years." He took a ragged breath. "They're asking about the alimony. He's been deducting it, obviously, all 20 years of it. But they can't find the deposits on your end. They said there's no record of you ever receiving the money." I felt a strange calm settle over me, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my skin. It was the feeling of a gear that had been slowly, imperceptibly turning for 2 decades, finally clicking into place. "He needs you to help him, Mom," Dylan pleaded, his voice cracking with a stress that wasn't his to bear. "He needs you to tell them there was a mistake, that you got the money, that you cashed the checks. He said you have to." I looked out my massive window, down at the bustling city that I had made my own. I had built every piece of this life, not with his money, but in spite of it. His help was the gravel in my shoe that made me walk faster, the insult that fueled my ambition. And now, After all this time, he wasn't asking for my help. He was demanding I validate his lie. He needed me to retroactively become the helpless woman he always pretended I was. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to do it. His lifeline had just become his liability. After I hung up with Dylan, promising only that I would think about it, the silence in my studio felt immense. The hum of the hydroponic pumps, usually a soothing background noise, now sounded like a countdown. I walked away from the blueprints and sank into a soft leather armchair in the corner, a piece I'd bought myself after landing my very first major contract. I ran my hand over the worn buttery leather, a trophy, one of many. My whole life was a gallery of trophies he'd never seen. The call had unearthed something I'd kept buried under layers of work, success, and willful ignorance. It was the full crushing weight of his 20-year campaign of condescension. It wasn't just the notes. It was the entire narrative he'd spun, a web of lies so sticky and pervasive that it had even caught our own son. The wave of emotion that washed over me wasn't grief or anger, not yet. It was a cold, heavy clarity, the kind that comes when a fog you didn't even know you were in finally lifts. My mind, against my will, flashed back to the divorce. We were in a sterile conference room with lawyers who smelled of expensive cologne and quiet desperation. I hadn't wanted alimony. The very idea of being financially tethered to him felt like a continuation of the cage I was so desperate to escape. I had a degree in architecture, dormant for 15 years while I raised Dylan and managed our home. But it was there. I had a plan. She has no viable career prospects. Lawrence had said to the mediator, his voice oozing a theatrical concern that made my skin crawl. He wasn't looking at me. He was performing for the room. She gave up everything for our family. It's only right, it's my duty, to make sure she's taken care of. I insist on it. The mediator, a kind-faced woman, had beamed at him. My own lawyer had looked at me and shrugged, as if to say, "What's the problem? He's being generous." They saw an honorable man. I saw a master puppeteer, ensuring he had one last string still attached to me. He wasn't providing for my future. He was purchasing the right to pity me forever. He was building himself a permanent pedestal, and I was to be the living statue at its base, a monument to his magnanimity. The court agreed. The alimony was decreed, and so the monthly ritual began. The first check arrived a month after I'd moved into a tiny, cramped apartment with a leaky faucet and neighbors who fought at 3 in the morning. I was terrified. My savings were dwindling. The freelance drafting work I was picking up paid almost nothing. And Dylan, who was only 6, was struggling with the upheaval. I held that check in my hands for an entire day. It was enough to fix the faucet, to buy groceries without anxiety, to breathe for a moment. It was a lifeline. Then I saw the note, folded neatly. "Hope this helps you get by." The words were so simple, yet they landed like a slap. He wasn't helping me get by. He was reminding me that I was barely getting by. He was taking inventory of my struggle and signing his name to it. In that moment, something hardened in me. I knew with absolute certainty that cashing his check would be a greater defeat than any financial hardship. It would mean I agreed with his assessment of me. It would mean he was right. I put the check and the note back in the envelope, drove to the only bank where I had enough money to open a safety deposit box, and I locked it away. It felt like burying a ghost. It became a promise to myself. I would not be his charity case. The memories kept coming, unbidden. A parent-teacher conference for Dylan when he was in middle school. Lawrence had arrived late, dressed in a tailored suit, charming the teacher instantly. He'd put a hand on my shoulder and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I just want to thank Lisa for being able to handle all of this. Since I'm the one working, it's wonderful that the support I give her allows her to be here for our boy." He'd soaked up the admiring glances, a modern-day saint. I'd felt my face burn with a hot, silent shame. He wasn't just telling people he supported me. He was taking credit for my motherhood. And the most painful one, Dylan, at 17, on the verge of going to college. He'd sat me down in my living room, the one in the slightly bigger apartment I'd managed to afford after 3 years of non-stop work. He had his father's earnest expression on his face. "Mom, I've been thinking," he'd said, his voice serious. "When I'm gone, you're going to be really alone. Are you going to be okay? Dad says he worries about you. He said his payments are the only thing keeping you in this place." That one had cut deeper than any note. The poison had worked. My own son saw me through Lawrence's eyes, fragile, dependent, perpetually on the verge of collapse. I tried to explain. I told him about my growing business, about the contracts I was starting to land. He'd listened with a patient sort of skepticism. "That's great, Mom," he'd said. "But it's good you have Dad's help as a backup. Just in case. Just in case." The two words that had defined my life for 20 years. Lawrence had built a prison of just in case. The ringing of my phone shattered the torrent of memories. I looked at the screen. It was Lawrence. For the first time in at least a decade, he was calling me directly. The dam of my quiet resolve, which had held for so long, began to crack. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. "Lisa, call me. Dylan told you what's happening. This is serious." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. All he had to do was ask for help. All he had to do was show an ounce of humility. Another text came through. "Don't ignore me. You know you owe me this." And then a third. "I supported you for 20 years. You will fix this." There it was. Not a request, but a command. The same arrogance, the same entitlement, just stripped of its thin veneer of civility. He wasn't scared. He was furious that his narrative was being challenged. He believed, truly believed, that his 20 years of signed checks had purchased my compliance. He thought he owned my story. A cold fire started in my belly, burning away the last vestiges of doubt and hesitation. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, my independence for a hobby, my dignity for a quaint little quirk. For 20 years I had held on to those checks as a private act of defiance, a quiet rejection of his power. It was never about revenge. It was about my own self-worth. But as I read his demand, "You will fix this," I felt something shift inside me. The private act of defiance was about to become a very public reckoning. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The decision not to act, to simply let the truth stand on its own, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. It was the logical conclusion to a 20-year silent protest. But silence, I was beginning to realize, can be a plan all its own. My secret was a fortress. I had built brick by brick, check by check, and he was the one storming its walls. The next day, I didn't go to the studio. Instead, I drove to the First National Bank on Elm Street, a quiet, old-fashioned institution with marble floors and tellers who knew their customers by name. It was the only place I still did any in-person banking. I walked to the back, to the imposing circular vault door, and nodded at the man standing beside it. Mr. Peterson. He was a relic from another era, a bank manager who had been there since before the ATM was invented. He was a tall, stooped man with a fringe of white hair and eyes that had seen everything. He'd been the one to set up my safety deposit box 20 years ago, and for 2 decades he had been the silent witness to my ritual. "Good morning, Lisa," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't call me Mrs. Grant, and hadn't since the second or third visit all those years ago. He had a way of noticing details. "Mr. Peterson," I replied, giving him a small smile. He led me into the vault, the air cool and still. He retrieved my box, a long, heavy metal container, and handed it to me with the practiced ease of long repetition. I took it to one of the private viewing booths and closed the door. The satisfying thud of the heavy door shutting echoed the feeling in my chest, a sense of finality, of a chapter closing. I lifted the lid. There they were, 240 envelopes, bundled by year with thick rubber bands. They were meticulously organized, a perfect chronological record of his hubris. I picked up the very first bundle, from 20 years ago. The envelope was slightly yellowed with age. I pulled out the check and the note. Hope this helps you get by. I could almost feel the phantom weight of my fear from that day. Then I picked up a bundle from the middle, 10 years in. The business was doing well by then. I was living in my loft. I'd taken Dylan on a trip to Italy that summer. The check was for the same amount, the note, a little more flippant now. Don't spend it all in one place. I remember getting that one. I had just signed a 6-figure contract to design the interior gardens for a new tech campus. I had laughed, a real full-throated laugh, and placed it with its brethren in the box. Finally, I picked up the most recent one, from just last month. Just a little something to keep you on your feet. The arrogance was so ingrained, so reflexive, he didn't even think about it anymore. It was just part of his identity, the benevolent ex-husband. I sat there for a long time, not looking at the checks, but thinking about the space they occupied. This box wasn't just a collection of uncashed payments, it was a time capsule of my own resilience. Every check represented a month I had survived and thrived on my own terms. Every smug note was a rung on the ladder I had built for myself. This box didn't contain his money, it contained my freedom. The leverage was never the checks themselves, it was the story they told. A 20-year paper trail of his character, and of mine. Leaving the bank, I felt a new sense of purpose. This was no longer a passive situation. It was time to be strategic. My first call was to my best friend and business partner, Chloe. She'd been my rock since the beginning, the one person who knew the truth about the checks from day one. "He wants you to lie to the IRS?" she shrieked into the phone, her voice a mix of outrage and pure, unadulterated glee. "Oh, this is better than Christmas. Lisa, this is the moment we've been dreaming of. The cosmic chickens are coming home to roost in his perfectly manicured McMansion yard." Chloe was fiery and pragmatic, the perfect counterbalance to my quiet endurance. For years she'd been telling me to burn the checks, to shred them, to have a ceremonial bonfire. She saw them as a chain, while I saw them as a shield. "So what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or rather, what are you not going to do?" "I'm not going to lie for him," I said, the words feeling solid and real as I spoke them. "But I think I need to talk to someone, a lawyer, just to make sure I understand what's happening and that I'm protected." "Good," Chloe said firmly. "You're not the one who did anything wrong, but his desperation could make him dangerous. Get a shark, Lisa. A great white." I didn't need a shark. I just needed clarity. Chloe recommended a tax attorney named Maria Jennings, a woman known for being incredibly sharp and discreet. I got an appointment for the following afternoon. Maria's office was minimalist and modern, all glass and steel, a world away from the musty marble of Mr. Peterson's bank. She was a woman in her late 40s with a sharp black bob and an even sharper gaze. I explained the situation simply: the 20 years of alimony, the uncashed checks, the smug notes, the panicked call from my ex-husband. I didn't editorialize, I just laid out the facts. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. For a long moment, she was silent. "Miss Grant," she began, and I noticed she didn't call me Lisa. "From a legal standpoint, your ex-husband is in a position of extreme vulnerability. To put it mildly, can you explain that?" I asked. "Of course. Alimony is deductible for the payer and taxable income for the recipient. For 20 years he has been claiming a significant deduction, fraudulently reducing his taxable income. That's tax evasion. Plain and simple. The IRS does not take kindly to that." She leaned forward, a flicker of something, professional interest, perhaps even excitement, in her eyes. "But it's worse than that. The money, the actual funds he allocated for these payments, never left his control. Since the checks were never cashed, they never cleared his bank account. So where is that money? From the IRS's perspective, it appears he has been systematically diverting funds into an off-the-books asset pool. He hasn't been paying you alimony. He's been hiding money and lying about it on his tax returns for 2 decades. The back taxes, the penalties, the interest, it will be catastrophic. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I had understood it was bad, but I hadn't grasped the scale of it. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice a little unsteady. "Am I in any trouble?" "For what?" Maria asked, raising an eyebrow. "For not cashing a check? There is no law that compels you to accept a payment. You have no tax liability because you never received any income. You have done absolutely nothing wrong. You are, in fact, the star witness to his long-term fraud." She paused, then added, "And the notes? The notes are a beautiful touch. They establish intent, not the intent to support you, but the intent to demean. They paint a picture of his character that no auditor could ignore. They eliminate any possibility for him to claim this was some kind of mutual, informal arrangement." I left Maria's office feeling like I was walking on solid ground for the first time in days. The fortress I had built was not only sound, it was impenetrable. And Lawrence was on the outside, in the middle of a storm he had created himself, demanding I let him in. The first move in my silent takeover was the easiest. I did nothing. I let Lawrence's texts and calls go unanswered. I put his number on a block list, the digital equivalent of shutting a door in his face. It was a boundary I should have set 20 years ago. My silence was a vacuum, and his panic rushed in to fill it. The barrage shifted from his phone to Dylan's. My son became his unwilling courier, his messages a running commentary on Lawrence's escalating meltdown. "Mom, please call him. He's not sleeping. He's just pacing around the house all night." A day later, Brenda called me crying. "Dad told her they might have to sell the house. She's blaming you." Brenda was his second wife, a woman who measured her self-worth in carat weight and square footage. The idea of her lifestyle being threatened was, I imagined, her personal apocalypse. And then the tone shifted from pleading to accusation, the words clearly fed to Dylan by his father. "He says you're doing this on purpose, that you've been planning this for years. He said it's a vendetta. Is that true, Mom?" That one hurt. I called Dylan immediately. I kept my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic energy buzzing through the phone. "Dylan, this is not a vendetta. This is the truth. Your father lied on his taxes for 20 years. The consequences of that are his, not mine. I will not participate in another lie to protect him from his own actions. This is between him and the government. But you could make it go away," he insisted. "Just one little lie, Mom. For him, he's my father, and you are my son," I replied, my voice softening. "Which is why I am telling you the truth. Your father's choices are not your responsibility, and they are certainly not mine." The conversation ended there, a painful stalemate. But I had planted a seed of a different narrative, a different truth. All I could do was hope it would have a chance to grow. I tried to immerse myself in my work, finding solace in the living, breathing art I created. I was at the studio late one evening, finalizing the lighting scheme for a massive 3-story living wall, when the intercom buzzed. It was after 9 o'clock. Chloe had gone home hours ago. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice wary. "Lisa, it's me. Open the door. We need to talk." "Lawrence." My blood ran cold. He had never been to my studio. He probably didn't even know the address until he'd looked it up in a desperate rage. "There's nothing to talk about, Lawrence," I said, my voice firm. "Don't do this." His voice was strained, a low growl of frustration. "Don't hide behind a door. Let me in. I'm the father of your child. For God's sake." The classic manipulation, using our son as a shield, as a key, as a weapon. The old me would have buckled. The old me would have opened the door out of a misplaced sense of duty, or a fear of causing a scene. The new me stood firm. "You're not coming in, Lawrence. Go home. You are trying to ruin me," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty street outside. The polished facade of the charming, benevolent benefactor, finally cracking to reveal the snarling, entitled man beneath. "After everything I did for you, I kept you from being destitute. You ungrateful." I didn't hear the rest of the word, because I cut the connection to the intercom. I stood there in the silent studio, my heart hammering in my chest. I was surrounded by beauty and life, by the evidence of my own strength, and on the other side of the door was the ghost of my past, rattling his chains and demanding to be let in. I took a deep, shaky breath and went back to my blueprints. I turned up the music, a soothing classical piece, and let the ghost rage into the empty night until he finally wore himself out and disappeared. The silent takeover was working. He was losing control, and he had no idea what to do. The true power shift, the moment the ground irrevocably crumbled under Lawrence's feet, came not from an accountant or a lawyer, but from our son. About a week after Lawrence's desperate appearance at my studio, my doorbell rang late one night. It was my home this time, my sanctuary. I looked at the security camera with a sense of dread, expecting to see Lawrence again, but it was Dylan, standing alone on my doorstep, looking lost and broken. I opened the door immediately. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he was holding his shoulders in a tight defensive hunch, as if warding off a blow. He looked younger than his 26 years, like the boy who used to come to me with a scraped knee. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the center of my living room and just stood there, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. He took in the high ceilings, the shelves filled with books on art and architecture, the vibrant green of the plants that cascaded from hanging planters. "He never saw this place, did he?" Dylan said, more to himself than to me. "No," I said softly. "He was never invited." Dylan finally looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom." He sank onto the sofa and put his head in his hands. I sat down next to him, placing a hand on his back. He flinched at first, then relaxed into my touch. "I overheard them fighting," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "Dad and Brenda. It was ugly. She was screaming about her credit cards being declined, about the lawyer's fees. And he just snapped." Dylan looked up, his face etched with a pain and disillusionment that was heartbreaking to witness. He told her the truth. All of it. He said he never thought you'd actually make it. He said the alimony was about control. He said he called you his favorite charity case, something he could tell his golf buddies about to make himself look good. He said he was counting on you to be too weak and too scared to ever do anything but cash his checks. The words, though vile, didn't wound me. I had known this truth in my bones for 20 years, but hearing them confirmed, hearing that he'd said them out loud, was a strange kind of validation. The real tragedy was the impact they had on Dylan. "And Brenda," Dylan continued, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "She wasn't mad that he was a manipulative jerk. She was mad that his plan had failed and that the money was gone. She started talking about how much she'd invested in their life together. It was all about the money. All of it." He finally broke down, a deep, ragged sob shaking his whole body. "All these years, Mom, I believed him. I defended him. I thought he was the good guy, the one looking out for you. I let him make me think you were less, and I am so, so sorry." In that moment, any lingering desire for revenge, any satisfaction I might have felt about Lawrence's predicament, evaporated. All that mattered was my son. I pulled him into a hug, and he held on tightly, like he was a little boy again. The war with Lawrence was over for me. I had already won the only thing that truly mattered. I had my son back. The family that Lawrence had fractured with his lies was beginning to heal, forming a new, more honest shape without him. Lawrence, however, was not done fighting. Having lost his primary emotional pawn, he resorted to a cruder, more direct form of attack. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived via courier. It was from a high-priced law firm I recognized from billboards around the city. Inside was a letter drafted in the most aggressive legalese imaginable. It was a work of fiction. It accused me of theft, claiming the uncashed checks were his rightful property that I had unlawfully retained. It accused me of a long-term malicious plot to inflict financial and emotional distress through a calculated scheme of fraudulent misrepresentation. It demanded the immediate return of all 240 checks and threatened a multi-million-dollar lawsuit if I failed to comply. It was so absurd, so completely unmoored from legal reality, that I actually laughed out loud. I immediately forwarded a picture of it to Chloe and Maria. Chloe's text came back instantly. LOL. Is he insane? This is the legal equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum. Maria called me a few minutes later, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Lisa, this is what we call a scare letter. It's a classic bully tactic. It has no legal merit whatsoever. A check is a negotiable instrument, an offer of payment. It's not his properties once he's signed it over to you. And you can't steal something you were legally given. He's flailing. This is the desperate act of a man with no cards left to play. So I should just ignore it? I asked. You should frame it, Maria said dryly. It's a masterpiece of desperate fiction. Let his lawyers waste his money. The real reckoning isn't going to happen in a civil court. It's going to happen in a very quiet, very gray room with a representative from the United States Treasury. She was right. The letter wasn't a threat. It was a confession. It was proof of his state of mind, panicked, cornered, and utterly devoid of reason. He was no longer the puppet master. He was just a puppet, tangled in his own strings, thrashing about as the curtain was about to fall. The summons came, as Maria had predicted. The Internal Revenue Service requested a joint meeting. Myself, Lawrence, and our respective legal counsels were to appear at the federal building downtown. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a clarification. They had his 20 years of deductions on one side of the ledger, and a complete absence of corresponding deposits on the other. They just needed someone to explain the discrepancy. The day of the meeting was gray and overcast, the sky the color of concrete. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant dark blue dress and low heels. I felt an unnerving sense of calm. Dylan had called me that morning, his voice full of support. "You've got this, Mom," he'd said. It was all the armor I needed. I arrived with Maria a few minutes early. Lawrence was already there, sitting at a long, polished table with his lawyer. He looked like a ghost. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame, and the confident, smug posture I knew so well was gone, replaced by a tense, rigid slump. His skin was pale and waxy. Next to him sat Brenda, her face a mask of pinched fury, her eyes darting around the room as if assessing its resale value and finding it wanting. She shot me a look of pure venom. I met her gaze with a placid, neutral expression, which seemed to enrage her even more. The auditor, a woman named Miss Davies, entered the room. She was brisk and businesslike, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat at the head of the table and opened a thick file. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We are here to resolve a significant discrepancy in the tax filings of Mr. Lawrence Grant, spanning from 20 years ago to the present day. Mr. Grant, you have claimed alimony deductions totaling a substantial amount over this period. However, we can find no evidence that these payments were ever received or declared by Miss Grant. Can you explain this?" Lawrence's lawyer, a man with a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, cleared his throat. "Davies, my client, Mr. Grant, has faithfully fulfilled his obligations for 2 decades. He has issued a check to his ex-wife every single month, without fail, as a gesture of support." Lawrence himself then spoke, attempting to summon some of his old charming authority. His voice was hoarse. "I just wanted to take care of her. I wanted to make sure she was okay. I don't know what she did with the checks. Maybe she lost them. Maybe she just forgot to deposit them." Miss Davies's eyes flickered toward me. "Miss Grant, did you forget to deposit 240 consecutive payments?" This was it, the moment of truth. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I just felt quiet. I opened the slim leather briefcase I had brought with me. "No, Miss Davies," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I did not forget." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single, pristine envelope. I slid it across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of her. "This is the first payment, from 20 years ago." Then I pulled out another. "This is from 10 years ago." And a third. And this is from last month. I opened the most recent envelope and took out the check and the small folded note. I placed them side by side on the table. The embossed gold LG glinted under the fluorescent lights. Miss Davies picked up the note and read the 6 little words aloud, her voice flat. Just a little something to keep you on your feet. A heavy silence descended on the room. Lawrence's face was ashen. Brenda stared at the note as if it were a live snake. I never cashed the checks, I stated simply, looking directly at Miss Davies. I never needed to. I built a successful business. I made my own life. These were not payments, because I never accepted them. They were his monthly reminders to me of why I had to succeed on my own terms. As you can see, I have kept them all. I didn't need to show her the whole box. The 3 envelopes were enough. They were irrefutable proof. The story Lawrence had been telling for 20 years, to the government, to his family, to himself, had just evaporated. The truth was laid bare on the table. Miss Davies looked from the check and the note to Lawrence's tax returns, then to Lawrence's terrified face. A look of grim professional understanding dawned in her eyes. The case was closed. She turned to me and Maria. Thank you for your cooperation, ladies. We have everything we need. You are excused. As Maria and I stood to leave, I passed Lawrence's chair. He didn't look up. He just stared at the check on the table, a symbol of his spectacular self-sabotage. I walked out of that gray room and into the rest of my life, the weight of 20 years finally, completely, lifted from my shoulders. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was Lawrence's lawyer beginning to speak in a low, desperate tone about possible misunderstandings. But there was no misunderstanding. It was all perfectly, painfully clear. His lifeline had reached its end, and it had pulled him under. The months that followed were quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that had finally broken. The world I had so carefully constructed for myself continued to flourish. The business thrived, and I took on new, exciting projects that challenged my creativity. But the most significant change was with Dylan. The wall between us, built with his father's lies, had completely dissolved. He started spending more time at my loft, not as a visitor, but as family. We fell into an easy rhythm of Sunday dinners and long talks. He was finally seeing me, not as a fragile creature in need of protection, but as the woman I actually was. One sunny Saturday afternoon, we were kneeling in the dirt together, planting hydrangeas in the new community garden we had designed as a joint project. His apology from that night had been a beginning, but this easy companionship felt like the real healing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Chloe. It was a screenshot of a real estate listing. Look familiar? The text read.
Foreclosure.
Guess Brenda didn't stick around for the budget lifestyle. It was Lawrence's house, the grand, sterile McMansion that had been the stage for so much of his performative success. I stared at the picture, at the bank-owned banner splashed across the front. I felt a flicker of something, a distant echo of satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of detachment. His downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was right here, next to me, covered in dirt and smiling as he settled a new plant into the earth. My victory was the peace I felt in my own soul. I texted Chloe back a single word. Wow. Then I put my phone away and went back to my garden. It's funny how you can spend so long defining yourself in opposition to someone. For 20 years, a part of my identity was the woman who doesn't cash Lawrence's checks. It was a secret, a burden and a source of strange strength all at once. His power over me wasn't financial. It was psychological. He occupied a space in my head, a smug landlord in a property I desperately wanted to own myself. And some of you watching this might think I was crazy for holding on to those checks. Why not just rip them up? Why keep a 20-year archive of insults in a bank vault? Maybe it was obsessive. Maybe on some level it was about revenge all along, a long game I didn't even know I was playing. I've thought about it a lot, and I think the answer is that I needed them. I needed those physical reminders of his arrogance to fuel my own determination. Every time I felt like giving up, every time a client rejected a proposal or a project went over budget, I could picture that box, full of his pity, and it would make me fight harder. It was a strange and probably unhealthy motivation, but it was mine. True independence, the kind that really matters, isn't about the balance in your bank account. It's about evicting the people who live in your head without paying rent. It's about taking back the power to write your own story, to define your own worth. Lawrence thought his checks were the story. He was wrong. They were just the footnotes to mine. His final desperate words to me as I left that meeting weren't yelled. He whispered them as I passed his chair. A final, pathetic attempt to land a blow. "You ruined me," he hissed. And I looked back at him, this small, diminished man, and I realized the truth. "No, Lawrence," I said, my voice full of a pity he could never understand. "You just finally cashed your own check. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt underestimated or defined by someone else's small-minded expectations, I hope you found a little bit of strength in it. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your own power. And please, share your own experiences in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds all of us that we are not alone.